They don't pay very much for military, and the reason they don't pay much is they assume that we're going to protect them. That's not an assumption they can make, because why are we protecting another country? Now, I love the people of Canada. We have a great relationship. But if they became our 51st state, it would be the greatest thing they could ever do. Without the U.S., Canada really doesn't have a country. They do almost all of their business with us. And if we say we want our cars to be made in Detroit, with a stroke of a pen, I can do that. And other things in addition to that would not allow Canada to be a viable country.
There is no Canada without the United States. That's the message from President Donald Trump. We all know that's not true, but now steel and aluminum are back on the table and could be the target of tariffs. Sadly, we've seen this movie before, but like with most sequels, the second time is just far worse. In 2018, Trump applied 25% tariffs on our steel and 10% tariffs on our aluminum. That was just ahead of negotiations for the Canada-US-Mexico trade agreement. So is this just another negotiation ploy? Let's bring in the front bench. Former senior advisor to Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton. He's now partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers is vice president at Oyster Group. He worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter at the Globe and Mail in the Parliamentary Bureau. And Joël Denis Bellevance is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Welcome all. Thanks for being here. Dan, I guess I'll just throw that question to you. Is this just another negotiation ploy, or do we think that he is actually going to go forward with these tariffs on steel and aluminum? Because we know he has said he wants to make money off of tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if he actually signs these tariffs into executive order this evening. He's promising that he will. We've seen a lot of threats of tariffs over the last few weeks on Canada, on Mexico, and tariffs around the world, frankly, that haven't materialized yet. So we'll see if these ones are actually put into effect like they were in 2018. But I also recall in 2018, Canada and Mexico were initially exempt from the tariffs. I see there's now musing about Australia being exempt. And so I would say this is part of a broader negotiating strategy on the part of the Trump administration. They want to keep their allies and adversaries alike guessing about where the White House is going to take action. And I think it is about trying to negotiate new trade deals. The reality is, though, there's an inconsistency here. Trump is not a predictable character, and as we've said before in this program, I think it remains to be seen if we're dealing with someone who actually, a White House and a president who actually wants to renegotiate a new free trade arrangement between Canada and the United States, or someone who's actually sincere about these claims of territorial expansionism. I think part of Trump's thinking is a great legacy for him would be adding additional territories to the continental United States, and that's a concerning thought. So it depends at the end of the day who Canada is dealing with and which parts of the Trump administration, the internal factions, are sort of controlling him in that moment.
Shakir, do you think that that's the bigger play, to make sure that he can get his hands on our natural resources, specifically all of those critical minerals?
I mean, I think those things can be negotiated through a trade agreement. If the end goal is annexation, I just don't see that as a possibility. I mean, I don't even understand the mechanism that would be in place for the U.S. to annex Canada outside of, some sort of military invasion. I think in President Trump, you have a president who campaigned and got elected on, America first, no more foreign wars, bringing troops home. So it just seems so contradictory and so nonsensical to me that even though the prime minister says he takes it seriously, I get that position. I just can't fathom a realistic situation where the U.S. Annexes Canada in any serious way. I think if it is about resources, there are ways that we can deal with this through proper channels to kind of find ways to, whether it's export more energy, export more critical minerals to the U.S. and make sure that their defense capabilities and other kind of supply chains are secure.
Stephanie, technically, it wouldn't be a foreign war. I mean, they could keep their military at home and then just walk. I'm kidding. It's obviously a joke.
This is an insane conversation.
I mean, what do you mean on this? Just because Vashi is here, don't say that this is an insane conversation.
Think about what we're talking about. We're talking about the military, like we're randomly discussing the annexation of the country, military.
Well, it's not so random when he brings it up.
I know, but that's what I'm saying, which makes it so troubling, right? We're just sitting here very straightforwardly saying, well, I'm not really sure how he could do this. And the fact is that we're talking about it at all, which is, I think, the terrifying thing for everybody. And on steel and aluminum, You know, he did it once before. He tried to increase, you know, part of the point then was to increase his own domestic production. Yeah. It didn't work. So if it didn't work then, it's not necessarily going to work now, which brings around the question is why is he trying to do this again in the first place?
Yeah, and there's those downstream consequences with everybody that uses that steel and aluminum, that sees the prices increase. They're paying more, Joel Denis. So then what is the end goal here, do you think? And look, I understand, to Steph's point, if anybody knew where Donald Trump was going with this, then they should buy all the lottery tickets in the U.S. for the Powerball, because they would have a crystal ball here. But where do we think he's going with this? Because the Canadian government's sitting back and going, well, we're not going to say anything yet because we don't know.
Well, two things that we've heard, I think, that are in his mind is the fact that he wants to bring back factories to the United States. That includes aluminum and metal, that he wants to bring it back. And the other thing is that he thinks he can make some money out of tariffs to finance his tax cuts that he wants to bring to the United States. But who knows? Depends which Donald Trump shows up to the White House every day. So that just shows how unpredictable the man is, and which is, you know, very concerning. And it's only the beginning of his mandate, of his second mandate. We've got 4 more years of this. So, but well, I want to point out that I do like the current reaction of the government. What Donald Trump said was, you know, sort of treated with silence by Ottawa. And I think that's the correct reaction, not to bite at everything he's throwing at you, because you're going to go crazy, essentially.
Yeah, and Dan, we could go crazy with it. And, you know, to Stephanie's point, it does feel a little nonsensical to constantly react to it. But it almost feels like he's talking about the annexation of Canada a little too often. It's kind of like that joke that a friend says, and you're like, okay, yeah, no, I get it. No, really, you got to stop it now. No, I mean it now this time. I mean, at what point does you know, Prime Minister Trudeau pick up the phone and go like, dude, enough of this?
The reality is, as I said earlier, I think in Trump's mind, this is a legitimate outcome. This is the area of I think, legacy for him that he would see as a great achievement to add territory to the United States as part of his achievement as president. Do I think he's going to do that by force? No, he's already sort of said that that's not a reality. But using economic tools to do so is something he's considering. And I think that's the great concern for Canada, is that are we actually dealing with an administration that wants to strike a new economic and trade deal, or are we dealing with an administration that wants to use tariffs and other tools to punish Canada and to try and force us into considering you know, reconsidering our sovereignty? I think that that's the sort of concerning outcome that we head towards. But the politics of this are confusing to me. I think to other points that have been raised on the panel, and you know, the reality is Trump has been supported consistently by American workers, by unions. There's been a realignment of American politics where unions have gravitated towards Republicans in a similar way that we've seen in Canada, where unions have gravitated towards conservatives. So a lot of unions are going to be feeling a little frustrated by this moment. These tariffs on steel and aluminum, as we heard just before our panel, are going to hurt steel workers and aluminum workers and industrial workers across the states just as much as anyone else. And so it's a bit confusing that a lot of the people that supported him in key political constituencies that got him back into office are the ones he's going to be hurting first.
But Shakira, has he sold them something else in saying that he is going to bring domestic production back in the way that Stephanie had said it didn't work last time? But is he still trying to sell them that dream?
I think it seems like it, but I think, you know, we all say on these panels that tariffs are going to increase costs for Americans. So let's let that play out. If that's the actual reality, let's let that play out, and let's see how Americans react. You know, Donald Trump, again, campaign on reducing the cost of living for a lot of Americans. So if he's pursuing these policies that are not going to benefit Americans, there's going to be some blowback. And we'll have to see how he and, you know, the GOP and in the U.S., how they react to, you know, increased costs for Americans.
Steph, do you think that that's one of the options here, that we just sit back and say, hey, let it happen, and then you'll see how big of a problem this is?
It has to be an option, because what else are we going to do? I mean, you have a White House where they say, okay, if only you do X, Y, and Z, then we won't. Oh, just kidding. You did that thing. You put, you know, all this money into the border. You're going to appoint a fentanyl czar. But then you've got factions of the White House being like, actually, that's not enough. You need to do more on the border. And oh, by the way, only some of the tariffs will be, you know, we won't do them because of the border, but we're going to go and do steel and aluminum. Anyway, there's no coherence, is my point here.
Yeah.
So to JD's point, you know, with Ottawa today, this might be one of the first times where Ottawa just didn't with Donald Trump, right? Every other time we've had these knee-jerk reactions from the federal government, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And this time it's just like, let's all take a beat. Let's see what he actually says. If he says it, at one point it was supposed to be 5:30. Well, it's past 5:30 now, and, we haven't had it yet. So maybe it is, we breathe in, acknowledge that, maybe Donald Trump, he's in his last term, likely, as president.
Right.
But there are a bunch of Republican senators, Republican congressmen, Republican governors who will want to get reelected. And if the pressure starts bearing on them, then maybe that pressure does kick up to Donald Trump, and it makes a difference.
Is that the key, Joel Denis? Because otherwise it is really like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall, right?
Absolutely. Jell-O or spaghetti, if you try that recipe, but it's pretty difficult. My sense is that the Canadian response will have to be focused very much on the Republican states that can maybe sway Mr. Trump. And we also know for a fact that Mr. Trump follows a lot the markets. So if the markets start to drop in reaction to his decision, that will be a key moment for the Canadian response. But we need to keep building alliances in key red states that can have an influence on Mr. Trump. That's the key thing.
Okay. We're going to leave that subject right there for just a second.